dog hair all over me. Excellent.
Noah Cutter, Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship professional combative athlete. Welcome to Hobby of a Lifestyle.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Oh, thank you. I mean, we've just been talking there for 5-10 minutes and we should have recorded it. It would have been the best thing for a podcast. And we've been talking about sort of the karate combat and the transition that's making, and having, people who sort of practice pure karate now, we're seeing different disciplines and styles coming into it. And I was thinking about this. You mentioned, obviously, just prior to recording, that you've got a second degree black belt yourself. But then having watched some of your fights as well, it's one of my things I love about the karate and those disciplines is I love legs. I love watching someone who's got a really nice leg and the way through it around. But I sometimes see the punches leave a little bit to be desired. And after watching some of your fights, and obviously the background that you're coming in from now, that would be so good to see someone with your sort of pedigree going in against a kicker who maybe isn't as good a puncher, because I know I was a shocking puncher, but against someone who is a good puncher, who comes direct and straight and has that arsenal to them. But what's your thoughts on this now when we're seeing so many people transition into karate combat?
For sure. So we were talking a little bit about some of the UFC fighters and bare knuckle fighters that are transitioning. Some of the guys that have fought recently, like Sam Alvey, Benson Henderson, Showtime Pettis. And then we got some bare knuckle fighters that have gone over, like Go-Go. And I think it all just depends. And like we're talking about the purity of the sport, like how you and I are, since we're have a karate background, we kind of like the way that things were with all karate black belts fighting and less MMA fighters and things like that. But I really enjoy it. I think it's going to bring, obviously, more popularity to their sport, which is the goal right now. You don't want to stay stagnant. We were talking about how a little bit the hardcore karate fans are going to enjoy that, and myself included. But people like the generation, the time we're living in is kind of like the viral sort of social media time. So the more fighters they bring over, obviously, and even bare knuckle is doing it as well. We're seeing more and more UFC fighters fighting in bare knuckle than I like to think of people that just came up organically through bare knuckle. A lot of them do have MMA backgrounds, but I think about like Juggernaut, Lorenzo Hunt. He has an MMA background, but was never really popular in MMA, was never in UFC or anything like that. So he, in my mind, is like a bare knuckle, athlete. That's what he was most popular from. Whereas Mike Perry is popular, but obviously he's more considered like a UFC fighter.
Yeah.
So with the guys coming over in karate combat, I think the ones that have background in karate, like I think Showtime's background was more Taekwondo. I think Benson Henderson had some karate background. Honestly, I don't know if Sam Alvey has much of a karate background.
Yeah.
And then I know the guys that came over from bare knuckle have no karate background. So it's kind of interesting to see a guy like Go from being the welterweight champion in bare knuckle and being undefeated to going over to karate combat and then losing his very first fight against a contender in karate combat. But I kind of felt like that was going to be pretty obvious was what was going to happen, because as far as I know, Go-Go and the other guy from Goat Shit Academy, they don't have any karate background. So, bare knuckle fighting is probably one of the easier things to learn to become an athlete in, honestly, because, and we've seen a couple guys like a fighter that I really like a lot is David Diaz.
Right.
The smaller weight Mexican fellow. He came over and, when he did his first bare knuckle fight, he had never done a fight sanctioned, no amateur boxing, no amateur MMA or anything. He just came over straight and became a professional bare knuckle fighter, and he's found pretty good amount of success in it too. I feel like bare knuckle is kind of the easier thing to transition to, because it's basically just a 5-round 10-minute fist fight, and most people have been in a
More.
street fight. Karate, as you know, if you've done it, and karate style, I used to do MMA, and kickboxing was my forte
Yeah.
that I really liked. And everyone that does MMA, as you've probably seen, has more of a Muay Thai style
Yeah.
way of kicking a
Yeah.
lot of the
I think,
times.
and that must, having trained a little bit with MMA competitors and whatnot, it's that with the karate, the sport karate, whatever discipline you're practicing within those realms is, it's that movement. There's no risk of someone taking your leg. So the weight
Mhm.
distribution is different. You can be a little bit lighter on your feet. Whereas obviously when it comes to the MMA, you're probably always conscious that someone's going to shoot for the leg, and you have to be a bit more, well, not immobile, but you have to be a little bit more feet planted so that you're ready for that to react.
Yeah, everything. Fighting, obviously, striking in MMA and striking where you're only striking with your hands, and then kickbox striking are all three different. And when I teach kickboxing and karate, and when I teach it to people, there's so many nuances to everything. Whereas, like, yeah, I train kickboxing karate for 12, almost 13 years now. And I've only been boxing for the last 3 years that I've been competing in bare knuckle. I never went to a boxing gym and trained boxing before a month before I did my first bare knuckle fight.
Wow.
So when I
And
did my first bare knuckle fight, my movement was kind of more like that of a karate fighter. I was kind of more bouncing on my feet in
yeah,
and out. And I found some success with that early on. But then when I began training my hands more, like everything is different. The way you sit down on your punches is different.
yeah,
Obviously, I teach my kids, when you throw a hand combo, obviously you can sit down on that right hand a lot more when you know that's what you're going to finish
yeah,
with. Whereas if you're going to finish with a kick, then you're probably not going to sit down on that punch as hard so that you can keep your feet light to come up and kick. But just to touch back on that and what we were talking about originally, I just thought there was no way that a competitor like Go is going to be able to learn enough in a year to be able to compete with a high level kicker. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, I figured they're going to come out and throw their hands. And there's another bare knuckle fighter that was on that card. His name's escaping me. I think Fames just fought on a card as well, and he's like a bare knuckle fighter. But it takes years to practice that development to learn how to chamber, what we call
yeah,
like chambering a kick and to throw a nice tight chambered roundhouse or front kick or side kick or whatever. So when you only have a year to learn kickboxing, you're probably going to just use your hands a lot and then throw
yeah,
leg kicks, like throw some kicks to the leg where it's nice and low. You don't got to raise your hips real high, and you can kind of come through sort of ugly with it. All you got to
yeah,
do is
yeah,
kick in the calf.
yeah.
But, they're not going to be able to develop the ability, the hip movement and things like that for years and years. So
No,
I
you
think,
think about that, don't you? And you almost go, if I think about putting myself in the coach's position of trying to coach somebody to transition from being purely hands to
mhm,
competing against people who can kick. And I think I'd be looking for the setup. How do I make them kick so that actually then I can invade and
with
use
the
my hands?
punches.
I probably wouldn't even be teaching much kicking at all. It would very much maybe it's how I'm going to block with the leg, how I'm going to use simple transitions to break the space and get past their leg so that I can actually then use my strengths and use my hands. Um, yeah, I don't think I would even teach them how to kick in a year of very little.
Yeah, and I kind of like agree with you. Like what I thought I would see them do is mainly boxing with some leg kicks sprinkled
Yeah,
in. But the other part of it is they include ground and pound in karate combat. So
yeah,
unless you do MMA, that's something else that you're completely not used to. When you box or when you fight bare knuckle, as soon as you get knocked down, you get
yeah,
that opportunity to get back up. And just like, you know, everything we learn is embedded into us
yeah,
throughout our career. So you see all the MMA guys come over to bare knuckle and a guy gets knocked down. The first thing they want to do is go over there and punch him in the face while they're on the ground.
yeah,
It's the same thing if you're a hand striker and you're a boxer and you go over to a combat sport like that where there is no when you get knocked down, there's nobody that's going to come over there and stop the fight and give you time to recover. You
Yeah,
know, now that you're knocked down, now a second fight begins,
yeah,
and you got to learn how to do ground and pound or defend ground and pound.
yeah,
And they just changed their rules in karate combat to where they're allowing more ground and pound now as well.
yeah. I think it
So
was 5 seconds originally, wasn't it? A kind of strike them whilst they're on the floor, and I think it's longer again now.
yeah, I think it's unlimited time now. I was
Right.
just watching him go over the rules the other day, and I think they were saying ground and pound just goes
Wow.
until the other person gets back to their feet. Or, you know, if you want a ground and pound, you have to stay standing. You can't go into their
You
guard,
can't mount, yeah.
and then they'll
Mm,
stop it. But so now that adds another aspect to where there's going to be unlimited ground and pound. So it's going to be hard for those guys to move over to
yeah,
karate and karate combat or kickboxing any kind. But I really like the karate combat. I would love to fight for them. I want to do a fight for them this year. And
wow.
I'd really like to fight Gogo. I think me and Gogo at 165 pounds, both being from bare knuckle, um, him having more success in bare knuckle than myself, but me
Yeah,
being a better kickboxer than him would kind of even it out, and I think would make a really good fight.
yeah. And it is very much styles make fights as
Mhm.
well. So you've obviously looked at that one and thought, yeah, that's a good match. That would be good entertainment. Um, okay, so I think feel like we could go on this subject for a long time, but today this show is all about you and your journey. So you've kind of already talked there about the karate and the kickboxing background that you've got. Let's go back then as a child. Kind of where did you grow up and what were you into as a child?
Mm, as a kid, I kind of grew up all over. My dad was in the Marines, so we
Okay.
moved every 3 years. I was born in North Carolina. I lived in Arizona, then Georgia. I lived in Grenada, the little small Caribbean
Wow.
island, for a little while. And I've never, I wouldn't say I lived, but I stayed in Colombia, South America, a little bit as well. After my parents got divorced, my dad moved to Colombia, so I would go stay there over summer break for a couple months. For I think from the time I was 10 to the time I was 14,
Right.
I would go over there to Colombia. And I mean, as far as stuff I was into, like I always remember when I was younger, I was pretty athletic. Like when I was 5 and 6, I did like t-ball and baseball. And then when I was 7 and 8, maybe 9 or 10, I did basketball in
Wow.
Georgia, and I was fairly good at that. I was like pretty good on my team. I remember I made it to a 3-point shootout one time in Atlanta, Georgia, that they brought me to that I had to qualify for. And then um, that was pretty much it. I remember moving around a lot and being into sports as a younger kid. And then the last place we moved to was Florida, which is
Okay.
where we moved, where right before my parents got divorced, and that's where I pretty much stayed ever since then. I think I was probably 10 or 11 when we moved here,
Okay.
and I've pretty much been in the same area ever since. And I'm 34 now, so a little over 22, 23 years.
Yeah. And so I suppose reflecting back when you're talking about, the really cultured upbringing that you've had, that you were fortunate about maybe you win, but fortunate to see and witness different cultures and experience those growing up. But was that also detrimental to you kind of being able to focus on one hobby because you were moving and maybe settling into a team, then all of a sudden within 3 years you were moving in and having to establish yourself again in another sport, or maybe that sport wasn't as popular, so you were finding a different sport, and it wasn't until you got to Florida where you could really kind of settle down and focus on something that you explore more what you enjoyed.
You know, I'm not sure, and I've never really thought about that very much. I don't think that the moving was really like what was changing the sports so much. I think that I just wanted to play sports as a kid. Like
Yeah,
when I was young, I was always really tall and real thin and athletic. And there wasn't really anything like, oh, I lived here, so I played this sport, and then we moved here, so I played that sport. I was just always kind of trying to stay involved in stuff, and I was always athletic, so my parents would put me into that stuff. I remember my dad was always an assistant coach, like whatever sport it was that I was playing, whether it be basketball or baseball. He was always an assistant. I didn't really think much about it as far as the sports. I know that as a kid, I think it was hard, and it was hard to like move somewhere, make friends, and then know, like in the back of your mind, like, oh, in 3 years, I'm going to be leaving these guys, these people that I know, and then have to go make new friends and start all over again. But as hard as it was as a kid, I think it definitely probably helped shape me into the kind of person that I am, and to be like a kind of resilient sort of person, and to also be pretty easy to go with the flow. Like, even though I've lived here for a long time and I like the stability of being in one place, it's not really much for me to pack up and to go somewhere else and uh, live a different life in a different spot. And I think that maybe some of that was embedded to me as a kid. And then when I was a teenager here in Florida, I played football, and I really didn't like that much. When I was younger, I really liked playing baseball and basketball. But then when I became a teenager and I started playing football, I didn't really like it as much.
Okay. Was it because you had to wear pads? You just want the
Yeah.
full force.
Well, also, I just remember, like, when I was a teenager, when early teenager, young teenager, like 13, 14, my parents were going through a divorce, and I wasn't as athletic like as I was when I was younger. When I was younger, I was super athletic. I was always outside doing stuff. When I was a teenager, my parents got divorced. I was a little more like depressed and going through puberty and stuff like that. Wasn't as active, and I got more out of shape. I wasn't, in good shape like I was when I was a kid. And I remember just the sport in general, like playing sports here in Florida, um, especially like with on footballs and stuff like that. Like, it's really competitive, you know what I mean? Like, these people are really getting after it for almost kind of like the same reason you're talking about in the UK, you know what I mean? For like in uh poor people and different stuff like that. When you play athletics, like myself, I was just playing football for something to do. My mom wanted to get me out of the house. I didn't really care for it. But some of these kids, they're playing, like their life depends on it. You know what I mean? They're 13, but this is going to lead to a college scholarship, which is going to lead to the NFL.
Yeah.
And there's actually a couple kids from this area that actually made it into the NFL, but then fell out. But it's the same thing, like you were saying, it kind of with soccer over there, which is like people are super competitive. You know what I mean? There's not much opportunity. And so if you can get an opportunity in sports, people are going to take that really seriously. So if you're just doing it as a pastime and a hobby, and then these kids over here are playing super aggressively, you know what I mean, because they want to make something out of it, becomes like less fun. And I didn't even care for it. And then after that, I didn't do sports for a long time. I didn't do any kind of sport as a older teenager. I didn't do anything. And then in my early 20s, I didn't begin to fight until I was 22.
Okay, so when did you discover martial arts? Was it as an older young person?
Yeah. I had when I was a teenager, I think one of the times I was in Colombia, my dad signed me up into kickboxing class, and I did some kickboxing over there. I had done some different training as a teenager, just like I had played sports, but I never really grasped on anything.
Yeah.
And then when I was 22 was when I began to train and compete for mixed martial arts.
Right.
And I actually boxed originally. I just did an open fight night, boxing night at a bar.
Okay.
And I liked that, and I won. And I thought maybe I could train and box. And at that time, boxing was not as popular as it is now, and there didn't seem to be as much money in it. That was 14 years ago. So MMA was really like, that was on the rise.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking back 13, 14 years ago and thinking where it's kind of was to where it is now. And, as you say, it's been so much more professionalized as well. It's been, you think about the UFCs, you think about in the Europe, you think about Bellator, and you think about how those guys have really professionalized, and you've got one championship as well. And the PFL. They've really professionalized the whole thing, and they've made it. I suppose they've made it quite sexy as an appeal. Whereas, and it's now, as we talk about influencers and the different social media influencers, everything now, it is a commodity now, and it's not just almost a brute strength. It's a real test of skill. As you said,
Hmm.
that transition from one discipline to another. You think about back in even maybe 20 years ago, and it was the Gracies, and as soon as they tied you up, you knew that was kind of game over, and they're just waiting to get you onto the ground. Now everyone's skill sets are, and obviously you're always going to favor one more than the other, but
Hmm.
it's become more rounded now. Martial artists have become more rounded, and they are very much MMA fighters rather than someone who does jiu-jitsu who throws a few strikes to try and tie you up. The arsenal is much more varied now.
Yeah, it is. It is so advanced, and the guys at that level are so advanced. And even today, you can still see Gracie. As a matter of fact, since we're talking about Gracie's, Kron Gracie was still competing in UFC. I don't know if he still will, but he's using like a very jujitsu heavy Gracie type of style
Yeah,
in the UFC, and he's not finding a lot of success with it because it's kind of surpassed that point. You know what I mean? If
yeah,
you're not very well versed in striking, the probability, that was I have a terrible pro MMA record because I was a kickboxer. Obviously, I trained jujitsu and I learned jujitsu, but I was always a striker. And so I was just a striker trying to compete against MMA fighters, mainly jujitsu and wrestler guys who, you know, and that was just regional. And it was kind of like, okay, all you got to do with this guy is get him down.
yeah,
Don't strike with him because you can get knocked out.
yeah,
Even some strikers who I thought were just as good as strikers, if not better strikers than myself, still kind of had the notion like, well, why, go in there and do that with this guy when you could just take him down and
yeah,
try to submit him. And that's a very clear way to victory. Whereas if you go in there and strike, you might get knocked out as well.
yeah. Of
So
course.
yeah, it is matured into a style and a skill set that is just incredible to watch, even on the regional circuit. Now I
Yeah,
watch regional fights in the same regional companies that I fought for, and I watch the guys that are coming up that are just amateurs even, and I'm
yeah,
like, man, these amateur MMA fighters are so much better than
yeah.
when I was doing it 10 years ago. And even the professionals, I was like, this is so tight knit. There's no room for mistakes.
Yeah. It's those aspirations that we talked about earlier, though, isn't it? There's those aspirations now. Actually, there's almost like a real career pathway because
Mhm.
the infrastructure within the sport is there now, and everyone knows kind of where the feeders are. So if I win this one, I can jump into this organization, and if that one, I can climb into this one, and eventually, obviously, the pinnacle being someone like UFC to go and compete for those. So
Exactly.
I
And
think having that is in place is, yeah, it's made it a lot more professional, and say give young people and anyone else aspirations.
right. So going back to 13, and even now we're kind of seeing that more with boxing.
Yeah,
Now, boxing is becoming more social media and influencer based. And I mean, I look at boxing cards sometimes now on social media, and there's whole, there's like entire leagues of influencer boxing going on,
Misfit boxing now is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So you see, somebody who's like a popular fighter like Jake Paul or somebody like
Yeah,
that fighting on a card. And then on the undercard in a professional boxing match, you see a guy that looks like him fighting a guy that looks like, somebody else or whatever. And it's like, man, there's so many more opportunities. Whereas going back again 13 years ago, boxing was really kind of like dead in the water. And it was like, if you're coming up in combat sports, pursuing a career in boxing was like, you're going to be on the undercard. The most you got to look forward to is to being on the undercard and maybe making a few $1,000s
yeah,
in a Showtime event or something like that. And it's the same thing. The waters are so deep. You got hundreds of thousands of guys just in the United States
yeah,
that are boxing and boxing gyms trying to come up. it's all about the opportunity and who your managers are and who you train with and things like that. MMA was on it was more on like the ascent to the, you know what I mean? Like it was still coming up to where it was like the opportunities seemed like they were a lot more. It seemed, like I said, 13 years ago, now it doesn't seem as easy, but 13 years ago, it seemed much more easy to conceive getting to the UFC and getting on an undercard and making like 10,000 to fight and 10,000 to win
Yeah,
than it did to try to box to get onto a Showtime undercard and
yeah.
maybe make a couple $1,000. So
It's
that was
interesting
the
listening to it
perception.
from a kind of US versus UK, because I think sort of 12, 13 years ago, and I think back, we hosted the Olympics, and it was the first time that females boxed on an Olympic Games. And so
Mhm.
I think that created, so for, maybe here in the UK, the buzz around boxing was huge, sort of 12 to 13 years ago. But when you're watching all the professional bouts and you listen to the professionals talking about the misfits coming along and how they've reignited the sport, and you listen to the ex-pros talking about actually these influences, and whether you love it or hate it, it's the direction that things are moving in. And as someone who has done combative competition, I almost have to just tip my hat with them and say the fact that you've sold yourself and you've talked yourself into a fight that's going to pay you millions of dollars, whether or not you like watching or not, you can't fault them, and you have to credit them to say, wow, what a fantastic job you've done, because there's people who are striving to be professional competitors who will probably never make that in a career, and they've just used the platform so well, and you've got to kind of go, well, how entrepreneurial are they? It's so savvy.
Yeah, yeah, and there's definitely that. And with fighters, I feel like fight fans don't obviously care about that as much. I feel like it's more actual fighters who are competing who are also fans, and really like diehard fans are the ones that really care about that. Like, yeah, there will be boxers and MMA fighters, oh, excuse me, in gyms that are incredibly great and talented that you'll never hear from and never see on a big
Yeah,
stage, that have been training for however long. And then you kind of see this influencer that's like, well, he's got social media following, so he's given the opportunity instead of that person. And that's not really fair. But uh, yeah, that's just kind of the world we live in now. And also,
yeah,
at the same time, as much as that's not fair, it's like that person also went out and did something to make themselves popular. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, you can complain about it all you want, but unless you're out there making a living out of making YouTube videos and trying to build a following doing that, and doing all this different stuff to become that type of person to make people, when you're a fighter, all you've got is your fight. You know what I mean? That's the only kind of thing you have to interest people into you. Like, my social media is pretty slow and dead the majority of 360 days out of the year.
yeah,
And then when I get a fight and I start putting, and even when I get a fight, if I put up a poster, I got a fight in a month,
yeah,
that's going to do whatever. It'll get however many likes. When it's fight week, my social media is going crazy. I've got like 200 or 300 more times the activity on my social media
right.
all of fight week. And then maybe for a week after that, those people will stay and kind of linger around and see what you're doing afterwards. And then after that, it levels back down.
Yeah,
So as a fighter, all you've got is your fight. Whereas when you're an influencer, you've got this channel or this brand or whatever it is that you're always kind of doing. So the fight becomes a secondary. It's just something to add on to
yeah,
your popularity. Whereas when you're a fighter, that's all that you got is the fight.
yeah, yeah. And I've had this conversation with quite a few, certainly professional boxers, and talking about it. Almost, it's sometimes detrimental when you're starting off your career as a professional competitor, because you're so busy trying to build a brand, because you haven't to look for sponsorship. Actually, and I'm sure we're going to get on it with your journey, when you transition from being kind of full-time construction worker slash full-time competitor, and you're in a position where you can actually, that brand had started to develop because of the competitions you were in, and you were then able to become a full-time pro, and you could then concentrate on just fighting 365 days a year, and training and being in the game, instead of going, right, what have I got to do? Have I got to go to work? Have I then got to train? Have I got to go and try and get this sponsorship deal? And how hard must that be? How many in all sports? How many athletes have fell by the wayside because of trying to build a brand or trying to get noticed and trying to get those sponsorship deals? So maybe those influencers are doing it the right way around. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, true. And I mean, you we still see that with like Conor McGregor. You know what I mean? He's one of the most popular MMA fighters. He's been off kind of doing a movie, and it's like
Yeah.
going off and doing that. He hasn't really. I mean, I know he had an injury and stuff like that too, but shooting the movie and promoting the movie also has a lot to do with not returning to fighting, because it's like you're off doing other stuff. And then when you're off doing other stuff and you're making even more money doing other stuff, it's like, well, why go fight? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and you haven't got someone punching you in the face and kicking you in the head and
Yeah,
trying to snap your arm. And I can go make more money from making a movie. I know which one option I would be taking. It's so easy for him not to come back now. He's got
yeah.
nothing to prove. He doesn't need to be there.
And I think that doing that stuff, I mean, it has its own stuff as well. Like I've heard a lot of people talk about filming on sets, and it's not easy either. You know what I mean? You got to wake up early as fuck and go do makeup for like 2 hours and be here for 4 hours where you're not even doing anything. Do like a 10 or 12 hour day to maybe say a couple lines and then go back to your fucking trailer. It's not a cakewalk either, but
No.
yeah, I mean, when you're a combat athlete comparatively, you know what I mean, it's
Yeah.
much easier.
Yeah, then a 12-week camp or a 10-week camp, and then at the end of it, and especially the sport you do, getting punched off someone with bare knuckles is like that's one shot sometimes, and the fight's just completely done with. At least when you've got a little bit of protection, there's a chance you can block and you can glance. And but someone catches you full on with a fist, it's kind of you've just got to be hard as fuck. There's no
Yeah.
getting away from
I
it.
mean,
You just have to be
it
hard.
literally just happened to me in my last fight against Sanchez. Like, yeah, the first 30 seconds in, I got
Yeah.
clipped, and I went and did the, long or had the hardest training camp that I've done. I went and trained with Lorenzo Hunt. I fucking, put in more work and more time and more money into the camp
Yeah.
than I ever had before and felt prepared. And then I went in there in 30 seconds, it was over just off of one little mistake. And it's like, man, fuck, it's the level, and especially at where I'm the level of guys that I'm fighting recently too, is like the level of error is so small.
Yeah.
When I started, and even still some of the guys, you can get into a fight in bare knuckle and it go back and forth a bit. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I've had some pretty drag out wars against guys where we beat each other up back and forth quite a lot. But now the last couple of guys that I fought, it's like one little mistake and they hit you with a punch and just it's enough to end the fight, and that's it. You don't get a chance to
Yeah.
not make the mistake again.
I mean, it's interesting you say that because I watched the Ricky fight. And that was kind of a 3-round war, wasn't it? That first, I thought first round, I thought he was gone. And that
Which fight?
first, the Ricky.
Oh,
Oh,
Francesco Ricci?
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
Ricky
yeah.
Ricci. So I watched that and I thought, first round, he's gone. He's gone. And then came back and it was like two and then thrown in the third round. It was like, wow, okay. But what I did notice in it, and I wrote it down as some of the notes, like I say, I don't do a lot, but I was watching that fight and you just talk about the training camp that you put into that fight against Sanchez. I actually thought when you started out, I thought, wow, he looks really relaxed. I think I was looking at the Richie fight, and your guard was really tight, and
Mm.
and maybe again, I don't know the backgrounds of it, but I thought actually when you came out for the Sanchez fight, everything looked a little bit looser. It looked more relaxed, and I thought, well, okay. So actually, when you say now you had a better training camp and whatnot, that makes sense to me straight away now because the way you came out from that fight, and as you say, it's one punch. Unfortunately, is all it takes sometimes. And was the I mean, what was the thought process after? Because that wasn't too long ago. What was the kind of thought process after that fight, knowing that you had done this really hard training camp? Eh, You know, you need to have time to process it. Have you had a chance to process that yet?
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, every time after I lose, that's all I'm doing is kind of like thinking about the fight and things that go differently and what you could have done different. And I don't know, man, it's kind of hard to figure out. It's hard to determine what it is that works and what doesn't work in bare knuckle because, like I said, yeah, that Richie fight, I was way more. Like I said, I trained for 1 month before I did my first bare knuckle, which was toe the line. And then I think it was only 7 weeks after the first fight that I fought Richie. So within 3 months, maybe 3 or 4 months of training boxing that I fought Richie, and I was really just fighting. You know what I mean? Like the thought process was just go out there, beat the guy up before he beats you up, and be super aggressive. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, and I used very little defense in that fight either. Like,
yeah,
there's hardly no blocking or slipping or
yeah.
rolling. Um, this fight, the thought process was use a lot more movement, move around on him, and yeah, try to be more relaxed. Like,
And that was so evident. Genuinely,
yeah,
I wrote it down. Looked, I've actually, I could show you notes. I've got looked really relaxed.
yeah,
And I thought, wow, okay, and it making more sense the fact that you kind of one fight was 7 weeks after the first one, and it's interesting you talk about there on the slipping and the movement. Do you think that having a karate kickboxing background it has been detrimental to that? Because I had this conversation with a couple of friends recently, and I think it's one thing that I'm not speaking for everyone in the discipline, but I think from a sport karate kickboxing background, I think it's one thing that we don't do very well is teach head movement. I think because we're so conscious that our center of gravity tends to be central because we need to be able to jump, move whichever way with our feet because we're going to kick and we're going to punch. This gets forgot about the head movement. I've probably got one of the best face blocks going. I'm constantly using my face to block punches and kicks,
mm,
and we just don't teach it very well.
yeah. That's definitely a possibility. Like, I trained kickboxing with my coach, who, like I said, is a 10th degree black belt in karate, and he has much more of a traditional karate style of fighting. And I teach obviously, a lot more boxing style
Yeah,
techniques in our class, and so that's what I do a lot. I still do kicking and different karate stuff, but I go over a lot of boxing technique. And yeah, when you work with a guy who's a traditional karate person, like basic slips and rolls aren't really basic slips and rolls, and also blocks aren't really
yeah,
like the biggest. When you watch a guy like, I can only think of like a Stephen Thompson, like a Wonder Boy in
yeah,
MMA. Um, karate is very much like hands low,
yeah,
using your foot movement to move in and out, and you're using your head. You know what I mean? You're moving and slipping and rolling with punches, but more often than not, karate, like, if you slip your head, it's on an attack. Like,
yeah,
it's just like slip and then
yeah,
counter. And then blocking is the biggest detriment I've come to find when you're moving over to just hand striking, because I'm not good with karate style blocking, because everything my sensei teaches, it's always like an outward parry
yeah,
followed by a strike or something like that. And even in karate combat, like, you don't see a lot of guys using that technique very often, like an outward parry followed by a strike, because that's more of a self-defense technique. Like, you're going to use against somebody in a street fight, like somebody's
yeah,
throwing a big punch at you. The premise is to outward block and then
yeah.
strike one time yourself. But what they don't teach a lot of karate is like basic
It's not
boom, block,
realistic.
block, catch,
Yeah,
you know, things like answer the phone for
yeah,
hooks. You'd almost never see anybody teach that, because it's not really going to be used in karate very much. So I feel like that's one of the biggest detriment, like the movement,
yeah,
but also the blocking is one of the slipping, the rolling, but traditional boxing style
yeah.
blocking is one of the biggest detriments when you transition over. And I don't know, it all depends. Like, I had more success early on when I had more of a karate style movement in and out. And then now that I'm learning more and more boxing, I'm finding less success. But I don't know. Like I said, it's all relevant
Yeah.
because I was able to do that with Richie, who went on to become the second middleweight champion,
Yeah.
and knock him down twice in the first round and have an all-out
It
war and almost have
it
him out
was.
of there, and everything else that happened after the fight to fighting Sanchez, and he's just kind of like a competitor and getting finished in the first 30 seconds. So,
Yeah. Okay, because we're talking about the bare knuckle stuff so much. I mean, how did this opportunity present itself? Because it is one of the fastest growing kind of combative sports organizations in the world now. Everywhere
mhm,
you go, you cannot switch on social media without seeing come up. Certainly on my feed, there's something comes up. David Feldman's there, or BKFC's advertising something. And I mean, you talk about some of the UFC megastars who would transition into it because the opportunities it provided them were huge. And there's people from over here in the UK who competed, and I'm like, it's everywhere. So how does that opportunity present itself to you when, like you say, you've never really boxed, certainly bare knuckle stuff. You've come from a more traditional karate, kickboxing background, MMA. Talk me
mhm.
through the process.
Well, I think that there was a lot of MMA fighters like myself that found it very interesting because even though you're not kickboxing and you don't get to use your kicks, you're just striking.
Yeah,
So any MMA fighter who is a striker who has a lot of losses by submission or who couldn't hang with the wrestlers and is getting tired of taking down find it very lucrative, you know what I mean? And also because there's not a lot of opportunity. Um, I remember when I first started fighting for bare knuckle, I DM'd David Feldman on
yeah, yeah.
Instagram and was like, I want to come fight for you. And he answered my DM and was like, where do you live?
Wow.
I was like, I live
He's
in
answered mine,
Northwest
to be
Florida.
fair, though.
Yeah.
He's
And I was like,
answered
I live
mine.
in Northwest Florida. And he was like, okay, we'll see what we can do. You know what I mean? And that was 3 years ago. Now I would guess if you try to DM David Feldman on Instagram, he's probably never going to even see your message.
Do you know what? I'm going to give David Feldman all the credit that he deserves. I have DM'd him to see about getting him on the podcast. Obviously, he's a busy guy, and
Mm,
every time he's messaged me back.
wow.
And I think that's a testament to the person that he is. The fact, yes, it's never escalated, unfortunately, at the moment, but
Mm,
every time I message him, credit where credit's due, he has responded.
yeah.
So
So that's pretty incredible. I mean, even like I said, 3 years ago, you can only imagine how many guys have just DM'd him or
yeah,
commented or tagged him and been like, I want to come fight for you. And for him to get around to him, even though he's not the matchmaker, he could
yeah,
easily just be like, here's the matchmaker's
yeah,
Instagram, go talk to him. Yeah, he's definitely a grinder and a hustler. And you can see it in the way that BKFC's been built up over
yeah,
the years. But yeah, for me, it was just that I found it interesting. I wanted to do it. I thought I could do it. I watched a fight with Caleb Harris where I can't remember the opponent's name, but it was where he virally knocked him out. The
right.
guy from Hawaii.
I'm not
It's
going to pretend
I
I've
mean
seen
it's
it. I
a
haven't.
it's a viral knockout. I mean they still play it on advertisements sometimes for BKSC, but at the time it was really viral. And he was 165. I was watching it at my job on the beach, and I was like, I could do this, and I'll just call out whoever wins this fight. And it was Caleb Harris, and I was like, I want to come to BKFC and fight Caleb Harris. And there was a lot of interest in it. Honestly, they were like, yeah, we could do that. You know what I mean? Like,
Wow.
especially since, get into the politics of it, they're always going to need guys that are like sort of stepping stone type guys without as
Yeah,
good of records. So if you don't have a good record and you're willing to just go there and be like, listen, I'll fight whoever, I don't care, just give me the opportunity, then there's a chance that you will get the opportunity to fight for him. And like I said, I think it's a lot easier than calling up a Showtime and being like, I'm a boxer. Can you put me on an undercard for Jake
yeah,
Paul, or calling up UFC and being like, look, I'm a regional fighter. Can you, put me on? I want to get to the UFC. There's like controlled avenues to get to that.
yeah.
Whereas I feel like BKSC was it was just like open range basically at the
Yeah.
time. They were still building their roster, still getting guys that are BKFC fighters, which they always are doing. And now they got the Prospect Series. And
Yeah.
back then they had Toe the Line, which is what I fought on, which was basically Prospect Series back then. So they've got a pretty foolproof way of like,
Yeah.
we're going to put you through the ringer, see how you fight. If you can fight good, then we'll bring you on board. And that's exactly what they do. When I fought Toe the Line, um, it was really similar to Prospect, where it's like only nobody had contracts on Toe
Right.
the Line. We were all
Okay.
competing for contracts. Everybody goes in and fights, and then if you win and you win by knockout, maybe you'll get one, maybe you won't. I won my first fight by knockout, and I didn't get a contract.
Right.
Um, they gave a couple other guys on the card contracts, but at the same time, even though they didn't give me a contract, 7 weeks later, they asked me if I wanted to. It
Yeah.
was like 3 weeks later, they asked me if I wanted to fight Francesco in 4 weeks. And I said yes.
Yeah.
Those other guys that got contracts, I don't think they fought for over a year.
Wow.
There was like two other guys, and they didn't come fight for BKFC. I remember I did like 3 fights by the time the dudes that won contracts on Toe the Line came over and fight. So I think it's a willingness to fight, the pay range. Obviously when you're not used to making a lot of money, they'll be like, all right,
Yeah.
yeah, a few grand, get me in there. I'm good. Let's
Of
go.
course. And,
Um,
and you know what it is? You say that like a few grand, and if you're already working full time, I think about when I competed, and until we won so many competitions, it was only then it became a lot easier to compete because people were more open to sponsoring you. Yes, we'll give you this much money to help you get away here, whatever. So things became a lot easier, but you were still working full time to fund a sport that you love with
mhm.
with very little opportunity to go and be professional at this. And that was fine. That was the hobby that I loved. That was the kind of decision I made. But there's someone to say a few £1,000s for something that you love doing. That makes that prospect, a lot more appealing. And I think how many people in the combative world who aren't successful as professional athletes, and again, not because they're not talented, just because that opportunity they're trying to create for themselves, whatever. If someone offers you £2,000 or whatever it is to fight, or $2,000, whatever it is, that's a lot of money, especially if you're working full time as well. It could be a game changer. It's a difference between a couple of months of bills or whatever it may be. Um, and you talk about you've obviously doing MMA, but is it confidence? Is it audacity? Where did that spirit come from for you to go, I'm going to call this guy out who's just had this viral knockout?
Um, I'd been fighting for a while. Obviously, like I said, I did MMA and I did professional. As an amateur, I found a lot of success in MMA. I went 8-4 as an amateur, and I won an amateur belt in the region. And then when I went professional, I didn't have nowhere near as much success. And I fought like when you come up regionally, um, like myself again, was very much like a stepping stone type situation. I was never training at a great gym. I was always kind of at like a mediocre gym. And even back then, there wasn't even really gyms.
Yeah.
The little town that I live in now in Northwest Florida called Defuniak Springs, which is a little country town, it has, I think, 3 gyms now. The gym
Right.
that I teach at offers kickboxing. There's a boxing gym, and then there's an MMA gym, all here in the town.
Wow.
10 years ago when I was training, there were no combat sports gym in this town. I
Wow.
trained I was doing professional MMA training out of my coach's garage, with guys that we had from town that were, it was like very much just whoever's willing to come and train, who wants to learn. So then you got guys that are obviously training out of very successful
Yeah.
MMA and jiu-jitsu gyms, and you become like a stepping stone for them, which sucks. But having a stepping stone mentality is also a good thing because it's
Yeah.
very much like, I don't give a fuck. I'm just going to go in here and fight. And,
Yeah.
you never think you're going to lose, but you always go into a fight thinking, well, I'm at a disadvantage. This person is much better than myself,
Yeah.
much better gym. whatever. They got the promotion and the team behind them, and I'm just kind of over here training with my coach. But that mentality, I think, definitely helped shape me for the kind of fighter that I am, because that's how I am in bare
Yeah,
knuckle too. I'm almost the same type of fighter. Only I find more success in bare knuckle than I was in regional MMA. It's just instead of going 6 or 7 hour drive to go fight the best regional MMA
yeah,
guy, or the regional MMA guy that the promotion's trying to get to Bellator or get
yeah,
to the
yeah,
UFC or whatever. Now I'm flying across the states and fighting the hometown favorite guy.
yeah,
So,
and getting paid for it.
right. And so I
Yeah,
think it's just my mentality for fighting, and for very much like, I don't care, you know what I'm saying? I'm not going to be intimidated. I know I'm my own manager. I don't have a management team. So it's always hard when you manage yourself, because you have to look at things from a reasonable perspective. Like I just said, being like, maybe this guy has more skill or better this or that than I do. But we're still going to go in here and give it the best effort. I haven't felt like that in bare knuckle for quite a while. I feel like the stakes are always pretty even. And even when I fought guys like Francesco Ricci that have better camps and more popular, more things at their disposal, perhaps, I just never thought about it. I really just go in there and fight. And I'm just like, this is whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And so, yeah. Um, and I think organizations respect that. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like if I watched that fight and asked to fight the guy that got knocked out and was like, hey, let me fight that guy who just got knocked out viciously, they'd probably be like, yeah, well,
yeah,
we don't take this guy very
yeah,
seriously and you don't seem like you want it. If I asked to fight somebody who just viciously knocked somebody out, then they're going to be like, well, oh, wow,
yeah, yeah.
nobody
Who's
was
this guy?
asking for that. Yeah, nobody
Yeah,
was
yeah,
asking for that fight at that time. Nobody usually watches a dude have a good performance and then calls him out and asks to
yeah.
fight him. So I think that they respected it. And yeah, that's how. And I ended up fighting Caleb later on in the organization. It wasn't the first fight, but that ended up happening. So,
Wow.
you know, just
Yeah, it's
having the right mentality and, willing to put in the work, I think is, will get you pretty far.
yeah, and I think what I get from all that is actually you one love your job, but two you get to turn around and say to people, actually, I'm a professional competitor. I'm a professional fighter. That is my everyday job, and I get paid for doing that. And like how many people would be envious of that? And I feel like you don't take that for granted at all. I feel like you've worked hard to get there, but and you know how fortunate you are as well. And that, actually, what a fantastic position you've put yourself in. Let's be honest about that. And I think that does really come out when you're talking. But one of my questions that I'm dying to know is, because we talked about this just before we came on and started recording, is going from boxing gloves. There's always that mentality where you can clip a boxing glove, and if I get hit off someone who's wearing boxing gloves, okay, it's still going to hurt at times, but that's why we're wearing padding. It's to protect ourselves. Going to MMA gloves, and again, there's probably still some sort of psychological thing going on in our heads that there's still a little bit of protection there. But you know, can you describe what it's like? One, hitting somebody bare knuckle and just feeling your hand against kind of the head or against the body, because I suppose you're not sure if your hand's going to hold up neither. How many boxers do you hear break hands during boxing fights because they've hit somebody in a certain way and the hands broke? What's it like being hit as well off bare knuckle?
Yeah, well, the hitting is actually uh, no problem at all, because I train karate, and I always worked with my karate coach, my sensei, ever since I did MMA. He's always worked hand conditioning, which
Yeah,
was
yeah,
kind of like a unforeseen blessing that kind of happened, that I ended up doing bare knuckle boxing, because he's always worked my hand conditioning. So ever since I started with him, knuckle push-ups, different things, Makiurara boards, fighting, or not fighting, but bag work without gloves on, bag work without gloves on with only wraps, bag work where you're wearing gloves but no wraps underneath the gloves. Different things like that over time, just doing it for 12 years. I tell people it's the same thing as shin conditioning. I mean, the kind of the same thing we're talking about with the bare knuckle fighters. That's another thing to think about is when you're only hand striking for your whole career, and then you go in there, not only can you not throw a kick, but how conditioned are your legs going to be to getting kicked? You know what I mean? Muay Thai fighters build that up years and years and years to where a Muay Thai fighter gets kicked in their thigh and they don't even react to it like the way that, you or I would, or a boxer who has traditionally small, unconditioned legs would react to it. So it's kind of the same thing with my knuckles. Luckily, knock on wood, in bare knuckle, I've never hurt my hands over 10 fights. Through the long ones, I've only had one 5-round fight, and they were swollen, but never broken.
Wow.
And
that's impressive.
Yeah, so luckily, when I'm punching, I literally have no fear at all, or does it affect the way that I fight? I've talked to a lot of guys who, everyone's always arguing their technique, obviously. Even when I went and trained with Lorenzo Hunt, the Juggernaut, when I trained at his gym, we went back and forth a little bit on hand conditioning, and our thought press us on hand conditioning, and we both think differently about it. So, luckily, punching, I've never worried about it at all. I've heard some guys talk about techniques and are like, oh, you got to punch like this, or you don't want to turn the right hook over to the body because you might hit this. I've never changed anything. The way that I throw punches, I punch as hard as I possibly can. I have no fear in throwing my hands at all. Getting hit is a lot different. Like,
you can't condition your face.
You can't condition your face. You can't. I think there's things you can do to make your skin more tough, but I haven't done them. And, so no matter what, as soon as you get popped with one little shot on your face, and I've had this happen in a couple fights to where you just get cut, and you get a laceration. When there was a fight I had stopped for a cut on my lip, and I literally didn't even know I had the cut on my lip when I went into the corner. I wasn't asking my corner about it or anything because I didn't even know that I had a cut on my lip. Then we went in to start the second round, and the doctor takes a look at me and says, "No, you can't fight anymore. You're done because you're cut." And I was like, "Oh wow, I didn't even realize I was splayed open." So the cutting is the main thing. I mean, you can get punched, and obviously, when you get punched without pads, it's gonna hurt more.
What was it like the first fight when, because as you said, there's no way you can prepare for this. I don't care if you've done MMA. There's still some sort of protection across the knuckles that not necessarily softens the blow, but there's even a psychological element there. But there has, I know adrenaline takes over, but there has to still be some apprehension about that, especially that first fight, that taking that first shot. Actually, it doesn't matter how much training I've done in the gym. We know it's very different when it comes to the actual competition. What was going through your head? Can you remember that first shot where you just thought, okay, I've took that first one now, I'm ready to go?
Like in my first fight, bare knuckle?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'd been cut in MMA before. So it wasn't like a completely unknown kind of feeling. Even worse than the cut in my first fight, the guy that I fought, he had I think on his left hand, a couple of his knuckles were like severely broken and stuff over the years, so they protruded up like really, really high.
Like
and he caught me with a left hook at one point, and those big knuckles went right into my eyeball and temporarily blinded me. Like I heard a squish, and then I couldn't see out of that eye for like 20 or 30 seconds. And eventually my vision came back. But that was another one where I was like, oh, wow, the knuckles not only do they cut you and
Yeah.
they hurt more, but they get into a spot, like they
Yeah.
get into different spots where an MMA glove doesn't normally go.
Yeah.
It's very rarely. I just saw one fight where a guy got punched in the eye in MMA with the glove and he started complaining about an eye poke. But it's very rarely that you get hit in the eye with an MMA glove and it goes into
Yeah.
your orbital. Bare knuckle, that knuckle can
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
right
Straight
into
in.
your eyeball. And I mean, it'll explode
Yeah.
all the blood vessels in your eye. Whatever it was that happened with me that time, it made me temporarily go blind. And it'll make a lot of guys quit too.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
a lot of guys who probably could continue, but when you get hit in your eyes, it's such a sensitive spot. You
Panic
don't know
kicks
if
in as
you're
well.
going blind.
Yeah. Panic.
Yeah,
And it's,
absolutely.
yeah.
When I got hit by Dakota Cochran, when he hit me in my eye, I thought that he tore my retina
Oh,
because
Lord.
my vision was blurry. He hit me in my eye. It exploded all the blood vessels in my eye. It probably cracked my orbital a little bit. And I thought he detached my retina and I went blind. You know what I mean? So it makes a big difference, a little bit of padding uh, to
Yeah.
what it is you can absorb.
No, people will be listening now and thinking, oh my goodness, this has happened. Yeah, you're talking about cracking an orbital. What what drives you to continue to compete and get back in that ring?
Um, I'm just I'm not even a competitive person, so I can't even say that I'm competitive. I just really like fighting. Kind of another mentality sort of thing was when I was younger, when I was in school. I never liked when I was in high school. I never liked school. I ended up dropping out. And so me and all my friends, when we're hanging out, partying, drinking, and thinking like we're probably going to drop out of high school, the thought process was always just, well, you drop out, you drink beer, and you go do construction. And you just work construction until the day you die. You don't get any benefits. You wear your body out and break it down. And I was just kind of like, well, that sucks and that's not fun. But just, like an odd sort of thought process is I would rather go do that than go to school and
Right?
do educational work and stuff like that. I don't really prefer it. I like doing physical stuff more than non-physical stuff. So I'd rather go outside and work than sit behind an office job kind of. And so I kind of had the same thought process with fighting, which is like, even I've heard a lot of wrestlers like WWE wrestlers and stuff say anything I had to do to not work a regular job is pretty much kind of where I'm at, where I I just don't like the idea of working a 9 to 5 and doing construction. Even though I don't work construction anymore, I
Yeah.
still work other jobs just because um, I don't make enough money fighting as often as I do. Last
Yeah.
year, I only fought 2 times.
Yeah.
This year, I've only fought once so far, and it's just not enough money, even with the sponsors. So I still do side work. I still coach. So anybody watching this, don't think that that's the other thing too, is don't think that it's so great. Like people think that, oh, you don't work a job and you're a fighter. You're just living the life. You're so lucky. I got to work this job over here and wake up at 4 in the morning, exercise, and go do my job and then go train. You're so lucky. It's like, yeah, but I don't have disposable income either. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I
Of
don't have,
course.
people think it's so great to be independent and just be fighting. It's like, well, I don't got money to fucking, if somebody, I see a girl or something that I want to go take out on a date, you know what I mean? I don't got money to go out. I don't got money to do this. I don't got money to go get a nice dinner. All I got is enough money to get money into my gas tank to get me to the next training session.
Yeah.
And that's it. So it's not great. And I still have to work side jobs. I still work as a coach. You know what I mean? I still have to do a lot of things. But yeah, it's just something in me, man, where I've always just wanted to do something different. Like even when I was not athletic, I thought that I would be in a band. You know what I mean? I
Right.
was like, oh, I would be like a lead singer of a band or something like that. Wouldn't that be a cool life to do?
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because I used to think that when I was a teenager, and now I don't live like a rock star, obviously, but I kind of live a life that was kind of what I wanted, which is that I'm in the spotlight. People see me. I do something that gets attention, garners
Yeah.
attention from people, and people pay to come and watch me do it. Only it's not just partying and drinking and doing drugs and
It's
stuff
the
like that.
complete
It's
opposite.
showing up. Yeah, showing up at the gym every morning and
Yeah.
working your ass off and training and not having a life. And
Yeah.
there is no partying and drinking and drugging and girls and all that shit. That shit
Yeah.
is way gone behind you because you got to
Down
put
the
all that
pecking order.
behind you to be able to train.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, man, it's just, I think my mentality was always that I didn't want to be like a regular person doing a regular job, and fighting is the best way for me to do that. Like I said, if I could have been a singer and been in a band, I would do that. If I could be an actor and act on screen, I would do that. But I think I have the ability and the talent and, you know, a face that people don't mind seeing to do whatever it is that I want to do. And fighting just so happened to be the thing that I pursued and the thing that I kind of fell into.
It's fantastic. I love that. I think it's brilliant. It's refreshing as well. What does it, are you someone who keeps themselves in shape 365 days of the year, or is it when, even though you keep yourself in shape, is there a fight camp? What does that look like? How long would it be? And what does it entail?
Yeah, so I usually do train like now I'm training. 1 week after the fight, I was training. I took like 1 week off, hard vacation, and then after that, I go back to doing at least once a day
Yeah.
exercising or training. So I train year round. I don't like to get out of shape. I'm a little bit out of shape right now. I got a little bit of a belly, but I never get out of shape and I never get real heavy like a lot of these guys do. Like I fight at 175 pounds and I never weigh over 185 pounds.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I always try to stay in shape, obviously not training hard.
Yeah.
You don't want to overdo it, but I started sparring 1 week after my last fight. I went back to sparring, back to training, either exercising every day or doing bag work every day. And then for a camp, honestly, the amount of time and camp is usually pretty basic what people would think about for camp. Like I'm in the gym training and then I get an offer for a fight and then I begin fight camp. And really the amount of time for fight camp has just been up to when the BKFC lets me know I have a
Yeah.
fight. Honestly, they've been getting closer and closer to the date of the fight when they let me know that I have
Right.
one. Like I said, my second fight, Francesco, I knew like 5 or 6 weeks before that I would be fighting him. I think my last fight, I knew maybe 4 weeks. I knew
Right.
we were signing contracts to fight in a month. So you
Right.
almost have to be training and
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
in shape and be ready to go. You can't be sitting on the couch and be like, oh, we got a fight coming up now. Now it's time to train because, yeah, I think I only had about 4 weeks from the time that I got my contract and they offered me the fight and I signed the contract to the actual date of the fight. So,
And it sounds quite a clever tactic from BKFC to almost ensure that everyone that's competing is on the ball constantly, because they know they might have a short program, so that no one's really ever going to be out of shape and not going to come in there underprepared.
yeah, yeah, that's true. And also their weight
Yeah.
issues. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
They probably uh, keep weight problems under control more
Yeah.
so that way, where it's like, yeah, if you got a fight coming up, you better be ready
Yeah.
because you only got so long. Now, I'm sure that varies. Like
Yeah.
guys that are champions and different things like that, I'm sure they're given a little bit more time. But yeah, I'm sure that keeps people in shape to where, like I said, you can't just get off the couch and be
Yeah.
like, oh, I got a fight in 4 weeks. That's not enough time to go
Yeah. Of
from not
course.
doing anything to being fight ready. You've got to
Yeah.
already be in the gist of
Yeah.
things to get going. Like the last fight, a normal camp I'll usually try to do at least like 8 weeks would be ideal, but usually it's less than that. The last fight, I only went and trained with Lorenzo Hunt for 2 weeks, but that was because I was already training a lot before that. Like I didn't
Yeah.
go there out of shape and
Yeah.
not conditioned, not doing my combos. When I went there, I was already in good shape. So I fell right into conditioning. And then a lot of the combos and stuff I already knew from doing my own work. So it was very easy just to learn a couple things here and there and fall
Mhm.
right into place.
No, that sounds great. What are the plans for 2024? You've had one fight. How many more fights are you hoping to have this year?
Sorry, I just got to grab a Kleenex and blow my nose real quick, man.
Not a problem.
I've had bad sinus problems ever since I fought Dakota.
Not really.
Oh, sorry about that.
Not a problem.
This year, I'd like to fight at least 2 or 3 more times,
Yeah. And
ideally.
is there any fights pending at the moment?
No, nothing in the books right now. I've talked to the matchmaker since my last fight, and as much as I kind of put myself down about the last fight and it being over quickly, I also kind of complained because I was like, it was a main event and I didn't get a count, and I was up within like 7 seconds. I had a balance issue and everything, but I was ready to fight within the time limit and they didn't give me a count. So we were kind of upset about that. I told them, I'm not concussed. I made a post about it after my fight. I was like, man, it sucks that
Yeah.
that's my first fight in 10 fights where I didn't get concussed. I didn't get cut. I didn't have to get stitches,
Yeah.
but I lost. Obviously, I would have rather had that been a win.
Yeah. Yeah. Of
But
course.
now I also got a probably 60-day suspension
Right.
that I'm halfway through before I can
Right.
fight again. Um, they just did the tryouts in Tampa, which is only 4 hours away from
Yeah.
where it
Yeah.
is that I live in Florida. So and then they announced the card shortly afterwards, which is going to be in the middle of April. And I asked if I could fight on that card, and they said probably not, that it was too close to my suspension. My
Right.
suspension will be up, but they don't want to fight me yet.
Right.
So nothing yet. I would have liked to have gone to Florida and fought on that Tampa card
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's been like 2 years since I fought in Tampa. It's a nice
Right.
little 4 hour drive for me, and I
Yeah.
can sell tickets there
Yeah.
as opposed to flying across the United States and fighting somebody on the West Coast. But they also know that I'll say yes to that I'll
Yeah. Of
do it.
course.
So nothing in the works as far as I know. Now, as I drop a name as far as somebody that I would like to fight and that would make a lot of sense, kind of given the way that things played out, would be Grosu.
We'll see.
Yep, Stanislav Grosu. He just fought on the Contender Series or on the Prospect Series in Virginia, and
Right.
he lost his fight as well. We were actually scheduled to fight one time before in September, and
Right.
it fell through for whatever reason. I don't know why, and they gave the fight to somebody else. So then we both, obviously, the idea going into my fight was we could both win our Prospect Series
Yeah. Yeah.
main events and then go into fighting each other. But we both lost our fights, so that fight still makes a lot
Good
of sense
matchup.
because we both just lost our last fights.
Yeah. Yeah.
That could still happen. And besides that, I don't really want to fight anybody else in the middleweight. I mean, I would continue for the right opponents. Even Donald Sanchez, he wasn't that big. He wasn't a very big 175er, but I'm not a very big 175
Yeah.
pounder. And I fought at welterweight at 165, and I'd like to go back to welterweight at 165 because the last 2 fights, I weighed in at 175 and walked in at 180.
Right.
So, I mean, 5 pound
Yeah.
weight cut. I don't even do anything to cut weight. I
Yeah. Yeah.
literally just show up
Trained.
and get stressed out, and
Yeah.
freaking the weight just starts falling off of me. And the next thing I know, I'm on weight, and then I can't put it back on either. So I'd like to go back to 165 and fight back at 165. And then even more further than that is I would love to go compete in karate combat this year.
Well, I'll make sure I tag them all. I'll tag them all when we release this podcast, and so they're all aware of it as well.
Please do, yes, because and they know that I want to fight for them. They've seen me in the comments. I've contacted their matchmaker. I was really vocal in their comments when Gogo fought
Yeah, yeah,
and the president was actually liking a lot of the comments, and I was kind of thinking that maybe we could move towards getting that fight done. Maybe now that he went over and lost his first fight, and then I lost my last fight in bare knuckle, maybe that's another one that would
yeah,
make sense, would be me going over to go fight Gogo in karate combat, or
yeah.
anybody else for that matter. Like
To
I
call them
said, the guy
out.
that beat him, I can't remember his name, but it was Jenkins, I do believe, was the competitor that fought him in karate combat. And
Right.
I'd fight. I'd love to fight him as well. You know what I mean? I'll fight. Same thing. I won't call out somebody that lost to get an opportunity. I'll be more than happy to go fight whoever they want me to fight over there to get the opportunity to fight. I just think that me and Gogo makes a lot of sense
Yeah,
since we're
yeah.
both bare knuckle fighters. That fight, you could kind of builds itself. You know what I mean? That
Yeah,
we
yeah.
both have bare knuckle experience, two bare knuckle karate fighters. But
Fantastic.
yeah, that's the
Amazing.
plan. That's my plans for this year. Is I'd like to compete at least two more times, and I would love to go and compete in karate combat. And if I compete in karate combat, it's not a goodbye to bare knuckle either. Like I would
Yeah.
love to kind of bounce back and forth. I think with Go obviously contractually the way he did things, and since he was the champion for bare
Yeah.
knuckle, I know if you're a champion, they don't want you fighting in other organizations.
Yeah. That
But if
makes
you're not
sense.
a champion and you're just a competitor, there's no clause in my contract that says I
That's it.
can't go do MMA or I can't go and box. As
Yeah.
long as I'm not doing another bare knuckle
Yeah.
organization, they tend to have no problem with it. Now he was the
Mhm.
champion, so he had to give up his championship, leave, and
Right.
then probably never come back.
Right.
But
Okay.
I'd be happy to go back and forth and
Yeah.
fight in bare knuckle and then go fight in karate combat. They said they were going to do a cross promotion, and I would love to see what that would entail this year.
Yeah.
How it is they plan on doing that, if they're going to bring bare knuckle guys over there, if they're going to bring karate guys to bare knuckle, do two guys and two fights. That would be interesting. You
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like have me go fight a guy there in karate combat and then have him come over and take the gloves off and we'll fight bare knuckle.
Yeah. Yeah. Sound yeah exciting, isn't it? The prospects are fantastic. The
Yeah.
opportunities are there. I know I'm conscious I'm taking up so much of your time this afternoon. One last question, I promise, is if you were going to give someone advice, what would your one piece of advice be?
For fighting,
Anything. Life, fighting, anything you want.
I'll say for fighting and maybe even in life, um, to try and find something to do that you really love. And whether it be fighting or whatever, like I said, I had aspirations to maybe be a singer, or, a lot of people want to be movie stars, or whatever it is that you want to do, or you want to podcast, or whatever it is, that try and find something that you genuinely love, because if you don't love doing something, it's not going to come to fruition, for one. And for two, if you're just trying to do, I talk to a lot of guys, and I'm saying this because I was also the same way when I started combat sports. When I went from amateur to professional, was I want to make money. I'm like, I just want to make money. I'm not making any money at this. I'm losing money doing this. But the real reality is I'm still losing money doing this now as a professional, even though I get paid money. You know what I mean? This will probably, there's champions, and I know how much money the champions make and the big name fights and stuff like that. And you can get yourself into a position where you can make a living on this. But the chances of that happening are so slim. There's so many people out there hungry for it, and the different levels, all the things that have to just fall into place just right for you to be successful at this, that you've got to do it because you love it. And if you're just doing it because you want to make money, like I said, I did that myself when I started pro MMA,
Yeah.
and I lost a lot of fights because I was like, I just want to start and I just want to make money. And I didn't go through the right avenues. I
Yeah.
didn't do it the right way. And
That makes sense.
so, yeah, I would just say try to find something that you want to do that you love, and not because it's going to be successful or because you're going to make a lot of money at it, but, you know, find something that you do that you love, because I tell people all the time when people ask me about fighting, they're like, that's inherently dangerous, isn't it? Like, yeah, like, yes, it's one of the few jobs that you do besides probably being in the service or something like that, where you have to sign on a dotted line that says this could kill you. You know, there's a good chance you could possibly die from doing this, or you could kill somebody doing this, and you got to sign your name on that. And that's frightening. But I tell people all the time, I'm like, dying in the ring doing something you love could only be, you know, one can only be so lucky to die that way because you're doing something you love. You know how many people die every day in car wrecks on their way to a job that they fucking hate, that they don't even want to be at, and they're just kind of going through the motions just to be able to pay for their house or whatever, and they're fucking miserable. That's a bad way. That's the worst way to go. You know what I mean? And you don't sign on that dotted line that says in life that says, oh, I'm going to my shitty desk job that I don't like and I might possibly die today. You know, but it happens all the time. It happens all the time. The majority of us are going to die in a car wreck or die of heart disease. And so for me, being able to go and do something that I love and being accredited for it and seen for it is, I will sign that contract every time because it's just so fulfilling to me. I bring a lot of joy to people's lives that I wouldn't never, normally ever reach, who find a lot of joy and excitement from watching me fight and just from my story and daily things, you know what I mean? Like whatever, the people really like to cling to that kind of stuff. And yeah, man, that's my best. I know it's a little wordy, but that'd be my best piece of advice is to find something that you truly love and you're truly passionate about and do it. And even if it's not a career, do it anyways. Like if you're passionate about doing a podcast, do it, start it, just start doing that. Even if it gets no views. I watch a lot of comedy podcasts where the people say they started and they got 100 views, you know what I mean? And these are popular comedians, and at the beginning, or they're on their third podcast where they had 3 that failed and nobody watched them and they went by the wayside, and now they're on their third one and it's finally become successful and they got the monetization and they're on Patreon making $100,000 a month or whatever. So find what you love and pursue it no matter what, whether it be podcasting, drawing, fighting, singing. If you want to be an actor, make strides towards that. And do what it is that you're passionate about and that you really love, because at the end of the day, money is whatever. It's nice to have and security is nice to have, but like I said, if you get in that car wreck on your way to work and you're like, fuck, I'm miserable and I'm not happy and I wasted my life and I'm secure, but at what cost? Then it's, what are you really living for?
Of course. No, fantastic advice. Noah, thank you so much for coming on Hobby of a Lifestyle. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing your journey.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me on.